Analogue Pocket is an awesome console, but it's pretty hard to come by. If you've not managed to get your hands on one, don't worry, I'm going to show you plenty of alternatives in this video. So there's currently very little denying that Analogue Pocket is the top of the tree when it comes to modern day interpretations of the Nintendo Game Boy. Add to that the fact that they've recently released a glow-in-the-dark edition and a whole range of clear coloured editions, and it makes it an even more enticing prospect. And if you manage to get your hands on one, congratulations, because I didn't. In fact, when they first came around, I wasn't entirely convinced. I knew it was going to be something pretty good, but it was also something pretty expensive. And I wanted to see what they were like before I put in that financial commitment of actually getting my hands on one. As it happens, the people who pre-ordered them were waiting a pretty long time for them to arrive. But when they did turn up, they did look pretty awesome, by which time it was a little bit late for me to get on that particular train. Now, since their release, they have been in very high demand. Occasionally they'll come back in stock and very quickly they will disappear from stock. So when they announced the glow-in-the-dark edition, I did get pretty excited. Not that I particularly like the glow-in-the-dark version of it. I would have been quite happy with any version of it, but the fact that there was a new one going to be available and I would be able to get hold of it, and the fact that it glows in the dark is kind of cool, made it a very appealing prospect. So I was poised, ready to order, and as soon as they went on sale, I clicked buy. It froze on a kind of waiting for the shopping cart kind of thing to load for about an hour, and then it crashed, and then it had sold out. So it was a really depressing, demoralizing, frustrating, stressful process that I don't really want to be part of again. You see, Analogue makes some amazing stuff. However, their kind of approach to selling them isn't something that goes well with me. I just don't deal well with that whole high pressure, limited edition, quick buy it, get hold of it. It just stresses me out. So from here on in, I'm just not going to get an Analogue Pocket, and I'm at peace with that. See, after I missed out on getting hold of that glow-in-the-dark edition, I actually started to reflect on what I have got or what I can get my hands on for the same or much less money than I would have spent on the Analogue Pocket. And that's what I'm going to do in this video. I've put together a few possible alternatives to the Analogue Pocket for those of you who, like me, didn't manage to get their hands on one, or if you're not particularly keen on spending all the money on getting hold of one anyway. So I know I've rambled on enough. Let's get on to these alternatives. I tried to pick a fair old mix of different things based on the different strengths of the Analogue Pocket itself. Now, the main selling point of Analogue Pocket compared to a whole load of other Game Boy style handhelds is that it is not software emulation. It's actually hardware based. So the hardware itself can actually run the original Game Boy cartridges. So it's not emulation. It's like you're actually playing the games from the cartridges, which you can also do on a Game Boy. And I have got loads of modded Game Boys, and even an original Game Boy that's unmodded will play those. So you've got lots to choose from there. My first pick is the Game Boy Color. This little console has it all. It plays original Game Boy games, it plays Game Boy Color games, it's got that classic form factor, and it's just that little bit more portable, bit more pocketable than the original DMG. If you like the style of the DMG, you can always mod it in a similar shell like I did here. Now, if you mod it like I did recently with another Game Boy Color with the Q5 IPS screen, you get an absolutely jaw-dropping display on this tiny little console. I also love the ergonomics on this thing with the little bump at the back from the AA batteries. Speaking of batteries, yes, you can do the kind of rechargeable USB-C type mods on there, but I'm actually a big fan of the AA batteries. I use rechargeables from IKEA, and it always keeps my console going for a decent amount of time. And of course, with it being original Game Boy hardware, you are definitely getting the most authentic experience when it comes to playing Game Boy or Game Boy Color games. That said, on top of being able to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, the Analogue Pocket can play Game Boy Advance cartridges. And so can a Game Boy Advance. Or, in this case, my pick, the Game Boy Advance SP. Again, there's a lot of opportunities to mod this console, and the IPS displays do look amazing on these machines. Now, when the Analogue Pocket was first announced, one of its big selling points to me was the fact that it had Nanoloop software built In, which is a music making software, and if you've seen any of my videos before, you will know I love making music on Nintendo consoles. However, Analogue did originate on the Game Boy, and if you fancy making your own tunes, you can get an Analogue cartridge like the one I've got here, and you can play it on your Game Boy Advance. In addition to that, there's a whole load of other music making software that you can use, from LSDJ to Stepper to one of my personal favourites, which is Drone Boy. There's just so much opportunity, and you can play all these different bits of music making software and games, of course, on the original hardware. So that is a big selling point. So yes, the price of original Game Boy hardware has gone up in recent years, and yes, the price of installing things like the IPS screens is quite expensive. But to me, the opportunity to actually build my own creations is an exciting one. And despite how accurately the Analogue Pocket will play these games, there's nothing quite like having the original hardware in your hands. In fact, when it comes to Game Boy Advance, my next suggestion lets us go one better. You see, one of my favourite handheld consoles is Nintendo's DS Lite. This can be bought for a reasonable price. Again, prices are going up. But the thing about DS Lite is it's got gorgeous screens and doesn't need any mods at all to get up and running. If you get hold of a card such as an R4, you can run original Game Boy games through emulation. However, it's got the original hardware slot at the bottom for the Game Boy Advance. So again, you are using legitimate, authentic hardware and not emulation for playing Game Boy Advance games. It looks great on these screens, and with a bit more of an advantage over the Analogue Pocket, you can also play the entire huge back catalogue of fantastic Nintendo DS games, because you've got the two screens, of course, because it's a DS, but it's something that the Analogue Pocket can't do, and it's a machine that I really like. In addition to being able to use the original hardware in terms of games on the Analogue Pocket, it also has an SD card slot, and you can load that up full of ROMs for various different systems and play them on the console. Now, if that's something that appeals to you, and this does move a little more into the realms of emulation, I have got two amazing recommendations for you, which are actually on a much smaller budget than the Analogue Pocket, as well as the original Game Boy hardware. What we've got here is the Mio Mini Plus and the Kitty RGB 30. Both of these I've reviewed recently. Both of them I absolutely adore. These both have their own advantages and are fantastic consoles for playing a whole load of games on the go for a whole load of different consoles. So first off, the Mio Mini Plus. This is a supremely pocketable little piece of kit, and it's an absolute little powerhouse when it comes to running games for all consoles up to and including the PlayStation 1. I have been playing loads of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on this thing, and it's ace. See, if the form factor of the original Game Boy appeals to you, then this clearly is paying homage to that. But you've got additional features like the rechargeable battery, like the shoulder buttons neatly tucked in on the back, like that huge, gorgeous colour screen on there. There is a lot to love about this thing, and it's relatively inexpensive in comparison to the Analogue Pocket. Yes, it's emulation, but wow, what a great console with a whole load of features where you can swap in and out of games. You can even play it on its side for playing shoot 'em up games, which are vertically scrolling. I've done a video review of this thing. I love it. Since I did the review, I have been playing it all summer. I love it. So definitely one of my recommendations if the idea of just having lots and lots of games on one portable console appeals to you. It's also much smaller than the Analogue Pocket, and because you haven't spent quite as much on it, you might not be too precious about chucking it in a bag or a pocket when you're out and about. My other suggestion and current favourite is the Kitty RGB 30. The screen on this thing is about the closest you will get to the screen that's on the Analogue Pocket. You see, the screen on the Analogue Pocket is actually square. It allows you to rotate the image of the game in any different direction depending on the kind of thing that you're playing. This also has a square screen and can display particularly Game Boy Color, Neo Geo Pocket, any of those sort of retro handheld games that have that square form factor, along with a whole host of other consoles you can play on this machine. Another advantage of this one, which is a little bit in line with what the Analogue Pocket does, is you can dock that Analogue Pocket and play it on a TV. This machine's got an HDMI connection, so you can connect it to your TV, play on the console and watch the display on a big screen. What's more, it's an absolute bargain, and you can load it up and customize whatever games you want on there, and there's infinitely tweakable settings to get it set up just how you want it to look and just how you want it to play. This is definitely my current favourite. So moving away slightly from the handheld aspect of things, but still keeping with the original Game Boy hardware when it comes to cartridges, my next suggestion is Epilogue's GB operator. Now this is a quirky one for sure, but it's something that may appeal to quite a few people. You see, what this thing does is connects to your computer, and using a software from Epilogue that you can download free, it will load up your games and make them playable on the computer itself. Now, although the initial excitement is that you are playing your original cartridges, and that certainly is true, what it actually does is uses the cartridge as a reference to then download a ROM and play it through your computer. So you are still completely emulating. However, if you're concerned about legally owning all of the ROMs for the games that you are playing, this is the perfect way to do it, because you are loading up from the original cartridge each time. And you can actually back these up as well. So if you've got a really obscure game that you couldn't find a ROM of online, you can back that up. You can use it to back up saves of games as well. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. However, one thing you can't do with it is play it on my Mac, which is an older Mac and is on OS 10, and this is only compatible with OS 11 onwards. So it's very nice, it's very shiny, but I have yet to actually play it. Maybe if I get a new computer sometime soon, I'll let you know how I get on with it. It's also compatible with Windows and Linux, and it's just a cool little piece of kit. So for the moment, it's a nice cartridge display unit for me. But if you are interested in something a little different to play your Game Boy games, this might be worth a look. And last, but definitely not least, we've got this beast. Yes, don't forget, Nintendo's GameCube can actually be attached to the Game Boy Player. This is an awesome peripheral. It allows you to play original Game Boy games, original Game Boy Color games, original Game Boy Advance games. It's also got the extension cable here, so you can get a specific cable to connect up a Game Boy Advance and use your Game Boy as the controller for playing your Game Boy games on the GameCube. So this is an attachment that slots onto the bottom of the GameCube console and actually makes it into much more of a cubey kind of shape. Your games can be played on the big screen using actual Nintendo hardware, which is definitely one of the selling points of the Analogue Pocket too. So one of the drawbacks for a while of having the Game Boy Player was if you managed to get hold of one, you may not necessarily be able to get hold of the disc that's required to run it. And they went up and up and up in price, which made it not really a viable option just to have a quick go of your original Game Boy games. However, in terms of modding, things have moved forward quite a bit in terms of the Game Boy. And you can now modify your Game Boy by flashing your own mod chip using a Raspberry Pi Pico, which will enable you to run different software. And thankfully, there are homebrew alternatives to the Game Boy Player software, which are actually pretty awesome. So if you fancy doing that and you've got a GameCube, I would definitely recommend that as another option. Now, of course, this list is not exhaustive. There are a whole load of different options that you could play depending on your needs. If you wanted to get your hands on an Analogue Pocket, a lot of people will have different reasons for doing that, whether it's playing on original hardware, whether it's having a whole load of games, whether it's the huge screen. There's a lot of things going for it. However, there are also lots of alternatives, and every single one of those that I've shown you today are a lot of fun. So that's my list for now. Obviously, it's not exhaustive. There are a whole load of alternatives to the Analogue Pocket out there, and the Analogue Pocket is so well featured that there are a lot of different ways that you might come up with an alternative depending on your particular needs. So what do you think? Was it a decent list? Was I broad and varied enough in my suggestions? Was there anything obvious that I missed out? What would you have suggested? Let me know in the comments. I'm really interested to hear from you. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to ZedLabz. If you like any of the modded Game Boy consoles I've been showing you today, you want to have a look at their website. They sell all sorts of parts and tools for modding Game Boys, and if you follow the link I've left in the description, it's an affiliate link which will give you a discount when you go and shop there, and it'll support my channel at the same time. So I'd really appreciate it if you did that. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It means it gets shared with other people and I build a little bit more traction on this little channel of mine. In addition to that, I'd appreciate it if you want to subscribe and sign up for notifications. If you want to see more like this, I've got new content coming out every week, and if you want to be the first to see it, you get those notifications. And that is it for now. This is Joe Bleeps signing off from the shed. If you want to see more of me, there'll be some videos popping up here. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye.